So Game of Thrones is a project name. This will be due at the end of day on the 24th. So the 24th of whatever month we're in. January 01, 24. Okay, the project itself should not take very long to animate. We're going to do the animation part, the base animation part together. We'll do the base moving things around. But then the rest of it, kind of textures and lighting and whatever else, I'm going to show you some steps, and then you'll just kind of go off on your own to play with those. Project description, we are going to be animating a Game of Thrones-esque scene. Okay, animating a Game of Thrones-esque scene. Our learning objectives are setting keyframes, manipulating the timing of keyframes, basic materials and lighting, rendering, come on, rendering in Arnold, and then compiling a sequence. So the first, well, all of these are going to apply to every assignment that we do. The bottom three, though, are things that you're going to keep doing every single assignment, okay? It's not going to change much. Because this is an animation course, I don't assume that you know modeling stuff for Maya, so I don't want you or expect you to model anything crazy. So any kind of materials you use or any kind of models you build, keep them simple. Remember that you could have the most complex models in the world, but if your animation is crap, it doesn't mean anything. This is an animation class, and that's what we're focusing on. So make sure that your animation holds up, and then if it does and you have time, then you can go out there and start exploring and adding other stuff to it, okay? Don't try to cover up a bad animation by just adding in a bunch of random stuff. Cool. All right, so turn-ins. There's no planning for this one. So you will not have any kind of research or concept development or any of that stuff, so you can ignore that. For the turn-in, I do want the project folder, so put a little X next to project folder. And also put an X next to everything, because I do want everything for this one. And then because this is a animation, obviously we want a movie versus a still. So we will have a movie for this. Okay, so for the movie we want an 8-second animation with smooth camera movement. Okay, so that's how long our animation should be for this. That should be good. Our resolution, those I passed out, I think, last week, a little cheat sheet thing, the little cards that we had. Yes? No? Maybe? All right, so for our resolution, we're going to do 960 by 540 at 30 frames per second. Eight-second animation with smooth camera movement, 960 by 540 at 30 frames a second. The your name part, obviously you know what your name is. The class number and name, this is MACA 2540. Introduction to 3D animation. Or is it just 3D animation? What is the name of this class? It is just 3D animation, isn't it? Just 3D animation. That's right. And then this assignment is worth 3 points. So under points possible, you'll put 3. All right, so the way this is going to work is you're going to do your animation, render it out, make it into an After Effects file, put everything in your folders nicely organized. You'll have your sheet. You'll submit your sheet when everything is completed. Obviously, you're going to go through and make sure all your bullet points here are checked. All the correct stuff is right here. You'll put that into the server. I'll show that on the turn-in date. And you'll give me your paper. I'll go through and grade your stuff, give you any notes that I need on this, put the note grade in Canvas, and then give you back your sheet so you can see what you have. Okay? And that's how I'll know that your stuff is ready to be graded on there. Super simple. Just make sure that you keep the sheet because obviously you need that. Otherwise, I don't accept it. You'll have to refill out this entire thing. Questions on that part? No? Cool. Close that. Close this. Everyone should have downloaded the Your Name mech animation. Did anyone not download it yet? Nope, everyone's good. You guys are so quiet. Obviously, the Your Name part, you should erase the Your Name and put your last name there. So I'm going to put Sarcona on mine. Last time we created our own preferences. We want to make sure that we upload those preferences so that we're using them today. If you didn't save your preferences, you can remake them, just re-watch that last lecture. If you do have them, you will go to your D drive or your P drive. You will find the Maya folder and delete it. Then you will go to where you've saved your stuff. And you will grab that Maya folder and put that Maya folder onto the P drive. So I don't have one because mine's on my desktop or laptop. Okay, so every time you come in, you should be copying that Maya folder into that P drive to overwrite it so that you have your preferences every single time you come in. When you leave, you should grab that folder and throw that on your drive so that you have it. So this Maya folder here, pretend this is my P drive. I want to back that up every single day. And then when I come in, I re-put it back in that same spot on the P drive. Okay? On your computers, there's a Documents. That's a different Maya folder. Ignore that one in Documents. Okay? The one on the P drive, that's the one you want to play with. Okay? And then once you're done with that, then you can boot Maya up. Now the point of doing that is that all of those things we set up last time on that shelf, the delete history, the center pivot, the freeze transform, outliner, graph editor, dope sheet, all of those would just reside right there on that custom shelf. Without it, they don't exist because you didn't save it. If you remember, Control-Shift is the hotkey, so you can always just remake those things as we go. So if you see that we're constantly going to some of these things, then you can just re-grab those specific items. There we go. So I deleted mine because Maya was acting funny, and then I got it back. All right. So another thing with Maya is very particular about how we open files. We never just open up our file. So if we were working on something, we don't just open it up and start working on it. We have to tell Maya that, hey, we're working on this project. I need to set my project to this so that Maya knows what we're working on, okay? So before I go any further into the software, I've opened it. I need to go down to File, and I need to go to Set Project. And then in here, I'm going to go and find my project folder. So if I go to my 2540, I click on Mech Animation. Don't go any further than clicking on Mech Animation. And then you can hit the Set button. Okay? So it should be just File, Set Project, find your mech animation, and then hit Set. And what that does is it tells Maya, this is the project I'm working on. If we wanted to work on the stuff we worked on last time, I would set it to Sarcona Plane. If I wanted to make a new project, I would make a brand new project and then set it to that, okay? Cool? Has everyone got their project set? No. All right, so every time we come into Maya, open up Maya, set a project. It doesn't matter how long you've been away from Maya, it doesn't matter anything, always set it. That way you're sure that you're putting your stuff in the right folder. When we render something, Maya doesn't ask where do you want to render it to. Because we set our project, it automatically renders to that project folder. So what could happen is last class, somebody was working in their folder, then you come in, you don't set your project, and you start rendering, where do you think it's going to go? Into their folder, right? And then they're going to come in next week, they're going to say, whose crap is this? And then if they're a jerk, they'll just delete it, right? It's happened before. So make sure you're setting your project. Cool. So now we can go to File, Open Scene, and then we can open up our mech animation start. And then don't save, continue, whatever you want to hit there. Okay, so this is what I'm providing for you to use. All of these things here, all these little circles, are different controllers for different items inside the scene. In order for us to be able to control these items, if I click on anything, like let's say this big circle right here, you guys have, some of you have one or the other, okay. So some of you will have the channel box up, which is this guy here. See how the skinny thing here, and it says Channels, Edit, Objects, and Show. That's the channel box. Some of you will have that up. Some of you have the attribute editor up, which is this. It doesn't matter, we just need to get to the channel box so that we can play with this. So once I click on one of these circles, there's going to be attributes over here. So translates, rotates, scale, visibility, and then a random one. This one is, in this case, is called stairs. If you remember from last time, we were able to type in numbers and things changed inside there. That's what this is for. This stairs one is a custom attribute that I created that controls the stairs being built, okay? So this isn't like Maya automatically does this. I made this attribute, and then I connected it to all the stairs so that they would appear, all right? So if you remember from before, if I click on any word inside of Maya, and then I middle drag out here, that's my virtual slider. So if I click on the word stairs, I move my mouse over here and middle drag left, you'll see that the stairs disappear. Okay, so give that a try real quick. Grab any one of them, doesn't matter which one, and just find one of the attributes past visibility and just middle click and drag and watch it disappear or appear. It is magic, isn't it? Now, some of these you may have to zoom in, get a little closer to actually see it happening, but it's there. Okay, so every one of these is meant to be able to take this entire castle and collapse it into nothingness. Okay, once all of these circles have been put back to 0, all of those things should go away. All right, so if you look over here in the outliner, if you don't have the outliner up, you can click on your button for the outliner in your shelf, or you can go to Window Outliner and bring it up that way. Either way works for me. So under the outliner, you'll see that there are controls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Guess which order they animate in? You guys are so boring. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, that's how they animate. So number 1 is first, then 2, then 3, then so on. Okay, so if I go to any one of these and I start clicking and playing with it, you'll see that it does do definitely something inside the scene. Some of these will do 2 things or need to do 2 things in order for this to work. So just so you can see it, I'm going to go to my controller 1, and put these two numbers to 0. Then go to controller 2, put these two to 0. Then go to controller 3, put these to 0. So go through all of yours and put all of those items to 0. Every one of them. Whatever is past visibility, you want to highlight all of them and put them to 0. All right, so now all of those things are at 0. They should disappear. Now, quick ways to select stuff inside Maya. You can definitely click one at a time and type things in. That definitely works. Or you can also click and drag down things and type things in. Okay. Now, one thing you'll notice is that there's also a limit to each one of these. So tower around, middle drag this one, it only goes to 10. That's as far as it goes. Cone visibility, that one only goes to 1. So while I was rigging this, or while I was creating each one of those attributes, I'm able to specify here is the range that each one of those is able to go. Some of them, like, I think, rollout, where's rollout? There it is. Rollout, this one goes to like 180. Yep. Okay, so that one goes pretty far. And it also, boop, disappears. Okay, so in order for this to animate, they have to be done in that order. 1 first, then 2, then 3, then 4, and so on. There can be overlap between them, but you have to make sure you time the overlap correctly. So for instance, this thing rolling out, we can't have it just pop into existence unless there's something covering it up, showing that it's popping, or not showing it popping into existence. That's why on number 5, these walls out one are there because the walls out one cover up the fact that they pop into existence, so you don't see it. Okay, so that's stuff to watch out for while you're animating this. So what we're going to do is we're just going to set up what's called a base animation. We're going to go through, we're going to set up some basic animation stuff, and then we'll come back and we'll tweak all of the basic animation stuff. Okay, so cool. So I'm going to rewind to frame 0. So if I click the little rewinder here, or frame 1, that gets me back to 1 frame. So click that little rewinder. We're going to animate these things from each attribute will be 20 frames. Okay, so control 1, I'm going to go from 1 to 20, and then control 2, 20 to 40, control 3, and so on, 20 each for 1. Okay, so control 1, I'm at frame 1. I want to set my tower up and around to 0. So I right click on them and hit key selected. Okay, so I should get a red tick on the side of it that says that these two things are keyframed. And just like I'm able to highlight multiple words or values, I can highlight multiple words and do that to them as well. Okay, so we have 2 red ticks. Any objections? No, cool. I'm going to go up to frame 20. So I just type in 20 over here. You can type it in right there. There it goes. Or you can just use the slider and slide it over. And then I'm going to take both of these values up to as far as they go. And then again, set my keys. So remember, unlike After Effects, Maya is not an auto key. So every time we want to change values with an animation, we have to set keyframes every time. Okay? So now, just so we can see it, if we go back to 1 and we go to 20, we see that building getting built. Okay, it looks beautiful. Now this one here, because we did these 2 attributes, we needed to do both of those because the one, if I take that off, we don't see anything. One of them is controlling this thing moving up. The other one is controlling how it wraps around. So we need both of them on there so that we get this effect of it kind of growing. I'm going to turn on wires right here so we can see this. So we can see it actually like growing and wrapping around. Okay, so now I'm at frame 20. I'm going to go to Control 2, and I'm going to grab both of these attributes. I'm going to right-click and say Key Selected. I'm going to go up to 40, and then put them at their max, and Key Selected again. Yes, sir. We're just going to go to the next one, set keyframes at 40, go up 20 frames, set keyframes there. Grab the next one, keyframes, go up 20 frames, and key that. They eventually will happen around the same time, but for now, just set them 20 apart. All right, so something to note on mine, do you see how crazy fast mine is playing? I don't think any of yours are playing as crazy fast as mine. One of the defaults in Maya, pretty sure it's a default, is that it plays back as fast as it can, okay? So basically it plays every frame as fast as it can. So if it can play this back at 70 frames a second, it definitely will play it back at 70 frames a second. Now what screws us up though is we are looking at this, now initially you may hit play on yours and say that's going way too fast, and you slow everything down. And so now you're rendering out, let's say, 2,000 frames to make this look slower, but really when you take it in After Effects, it's gonna go incredibly slow now, like way too slow. So we always want to make sure we're previewing this at the correct speed. So we can do two things. One, under display, heads up display, you can turn on frame rate. That will give you a little ticker at the bottom corner. So display, heads up display, frame rate. And then if you hit play, you'll actually see how fast that's going. So right now this is playing back at about 200 frames a second. Okay, so 200 frames a second, I bring that in After Effects, this is going to go much slower. I want to see what it's going to look like in real time. So I'm going to right click on my timeline, go to playback speed, and just make sure that it's set to play every frame max real time. Okay, we always want to see what things are going to look like in real time. If we just set it to straight up real time, like this, what may happen is it may skip frames because it can't calculate it. So when we get into a character and we're animating a Spider-Man or whatever jumping around, he may go super slow frame to frame. If I did play real time then, he would basically go from like 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and I wouldn't see any of the in-between stuff, which is important for us. So I set it to play every frame at max real time, and what that does is it just plays back as fast as it can up to real time, but plays every frame. Okay, so perfect. So there's all of the stuff in our scene. 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, sir.
Is that something you have to do every time you go into Maya? Change the playback?
No, because you guys didn't, right? You didn't change yours? Yours was playing back pretty steadily. Thank you. Yeah, so it all depends on what your preferences are. Because I wiped my preferences over the weekend, it reset back to the other one. But always be aware of this too. So sometimes you need to have it on real time because you do want to see what it's going to look like in real time, whatever, as far as blocking things. But typically, this is where I have it as play every frame at max real time. Cool. All right, so there's all of our keyframes just kind of like blocked out. Now what happens is we get everything very choppy. So it's like 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4. What we want to have is a nice blend so that as 1 gets created, as this castle is coming up like this, what I want to do is that middle ring that's about here, that's why I kind of placed it about there, that middle ring that's about there actually starts building itself as it comes up, okay? So right about there, I want that middle ring to start building itself. That way it looks like the castle is like just one big shape just kind of forming versus all these pieces kind of coming together, okay? So what we're not going to do is change any of the values. So this has already been set up with the rig to say it's going to start here and it's going to end here as far as values go, but the space between, that's what we're going to change, okay? How many frames it takes and where those frames happen. So I'm going to go to controller 1, and the first thing I want to do is look at controller 1 and see if I like the timing of controller 1, okay? So if I rewind this again and hit play, I'm just going to focus on just that center tower. All right, what do you think about that animation for just the center tower?
It's not very interesting.
No, it's not very interesting. But what about it isn't?
It's just kind of like one thing after another.
Yeah, but just the center tower though, right? So what is it about that center tower? Let's look at a specific attribute. So something that moves that quick, do you think it's a big item or a small item? Small, right? So in the Game of Thrones ones that we watched, all their movements were very slow and graceful, and that gives the impact of more of a scale because things that are bigger typically move slower. Things that are smaller typically move faster. So one thing I can do is take this and spread it out so that it is taking a bit longer than that. So we can do this down here, just so you can see it because I do it all the time. If you hold down Shift and you middle drag around a keyframe like that, so I'm just in my timeline, just Shift and then middle dragging down here, it'll highlight that keyframe, and then I can middle drag and move that wherever I want. So I'm going to make it go to 60 so it takes twice as long to go up to the top. Okay, so that's an easy way for us to be able to take that keyframe and just offset it inside there. Now we do want to make sure we don't accidentally grab number 1 because that will move frame 1, 2. We don't want that. So just hold Shift, middle drag a little area around that keyframe, and then move it to frame 60-ish. Doesn't have to be perfect, just around frame 60. And then if you hit play, we should see this thing going slower. Okay, I'm actually going to move it to 80. I think 80 would be even better. That's better. Cool. All right, so that's one way that we can move things around. Now with this method, we constantly have to hold Shift and we constantly have to marquee it and we constantly have to drag it around. And also we can't see where the other keyframes are, so this can be very confusing. Where this can be helpful is, let's say I had this entire animation already lined up. If I grab all of my items down here are set up, I could hold Shift, marquee a whole area, and move all the keyframes at once wherever I need to. Or I can grab all of them, that's the middle arrow I was using. If I grab this arrow, which is hard to see, and drag it, it will actually squish the keyframes together, or the other way, stretch them apart. So again, another thing we can do inside here. All right, so I'm going to go back to number 1 here. And this is where I'm going to use the dope sheet. So for the rest of this, I want to use the dope sheet because it's a little bit more controlled. If you're a fan of Excel, you'll really like the dope sheet. No fans of Excel. All right, the dope sheet is basically just a spreadsheet. Here's your items, here's your keyframes, and you move them around wherever you want the keyframes to happen. Keyframes that are closer together, do you think they're going to move faster or slower than keyframes that are further apart? Faster. And keyframes that are further apart are going to move slower. Okay. So right now, control 1 is starting over here at frame 1. Oops, grab that. Frame 1, there it is. And then it ends at frame 80. So I could type it in very quickly, grab that keyframe, hit 80, and boom, it sends all the keyframes over there. This is what's nice about it, is that if I click on control 1 and just drag straight down to control 9, it will add all of those inside here in that same order. So now I'm looking at my entire animation in one spot, where now I can just move the animation pieces around to wherever I want them to happen. So if I want the center or the first ring right here, if I want this to happen sooner or later or whatever, I can click on Control 2 and then just middle drag and move it wherever I want. And that will just take that whole animation and just offset it wherever, okay? So I moved my first one to frame 80, right? So it starts at 1 and then goes to 80 for that first tower. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to offset it a bit. This doesn't make sense. There's no reason that this ring should be being created when there's nothing to create it. So I need to scoot that down a little bit. So I'm going to go to an area where I can kind of see this a little bit better, and then just move this down further. And then I'm just going to kind of play through, maybe pull it back a little bit more. There it goes. So now this feels like as this one's growing, the other one is then growing out of it. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the next one. I'm going to grab the next controller and then just move that down until it hits in a good spot where it's like, yeah, that looks like that's where it should come out of. Make sure you're in the move tool. If you're not in the move tool, it won't move. That's always a tricky part that people forget.
Sean, how do you move it in the dope sheet again?
The move tool. You're not in the move tool. W? Nope, regular W. And then middle drag. There you go. Okay. So now I'm just kind of lining up these things as to where I want them to happen. So this one should maybe happen a little bit sooner. And then let's say controller 5, that one's going to be scooted in a little bit more. What I don't want to do is, whoever's watching this, I don't want them sitting around waiting for something to happen or thinking that it's over. So right here, if you look, there's a lull where nothing's going on, okay? So I just want to make sure that my animation doesn't have a nothing going on. So I'm going to move this further back there. Yep, that's cool how that comes out. I'm going to go to number 7, pull that one in. A little bit of offset on those two. And number 8 is what? Oh, those things. So definitely bring that in. And then number 9. Whoops. So I'm going to keep my dope sheet open here so you can see it. And then down here, I'll hit play so you can watch that happen. All right, so you can keep playing with that after. That's the gist of basic keyframed animation and then moving them around to adjust where they're at and their timing and all the other stuff, okay? Now, because on our assignment sheet, if you remember down here that says 8-second animation with smooth camera movement, and then the resolution is 960 by 540 at 30 frames a second. So how many frames should we have for this? 30 frames? What does this 30 mean? 30 frames per second, and we have 8 seconds. I'm asking you to do math. Yeah, that's right. 30 frames in a second, 8 seconds. 240. Thank you, sir. 240. So we should have 240 frames of animation. So down here in this little bar that says 234, I'm going to change that to 240. Now, we don't have to have it animate all the way to the end of this. I stretched mine out. I grabbed all of my items, all of my keyframes, and stretched out all of them so that they all fit nicely on this timeline and everything looks cool, right? So it's nice and long. I have about 10 frames, 11 frames at the end. That is, you know, a little bit of a buffer there. That way, my thought in the animation is the camera's kind of coming around, it sees the stuff, and then there's a few frames where it's just like everything's complete and I can calculate what actually I just saw, okay? So that's our main animation. Now you'll notice that there's no stairs on this side of the building. So guess which side we're not going to show? That side. So what we want to do is animate just a camera move, just a nice sweep of the camera coming from one side, going to the other side. That's all we need to do. We do have to be careful that we don't show off any of the stuff in our scene. Like I wouldn't want to have a camera right here because then I'm going to see that popping happen. Okay? So we do want to be aware of those kinds of things. Also, if we go back just a smidge, the building is open right here, and that looks kind of stupid. Okay, how it's just open like that. From this side, we don't notice it too much because it's just kind of building itself. We don't calculate that it's hollow as much as we would the other way. Okay, so I'm actually going to try to shoot this from this side because this is the better side to kind of shoot this from. So I'm going to start off with my camera kind of a bit far back, and then like a helicopter coming in, it's just going to come up kind of slowly to it. I don't want to go fast because, again, looking at the speed of things, big things move fast or slow, and then small things move fast. So I need to create a camera. So in Maya, you go to Panels, Perspective, and you can make a new camera. So go to Panels, Perspective, and make a new camera. And then what I'm going to do is in the channel box, I'm going to rename that to be Render Cam. Okay, so there's my render camera. That's what that's called.
Where did you do that?
Under Panels, Perspective, and then New. I'm also going to adjust my focal length. So right now it's set to 35. 35 gets me a view that looks like this. If I set this to 20, it looks like that, meaning that I can get pretty close, and then this thing is starting to look massive. If I set it to, let's say, 120, well, it like basically flattens everything out. Okay, so it looks a little bit too flat for my liking. So I like 20 is a good number to use. You can see the camera feels a bit more dynamic. As I come into the camera, we get a little bit more perspective on it. Okay, so under focal length, set that to 20. You can go down all the way to, let's say, 1 or 2.5, I guess is the lowest. But that's like way too much perspective. Everything looks really distorted and disgusting. It's like an MTV camera. All right, even 10 looks pretty sweet too. So maybe I'll cut it and just do like 13. Lucky 13, there we go. Cool, so I like that. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to see what this is going to look like when it renders. Right now, I don't know as far as the sizing. This viewport could be pretty close to 960 by 540. It looks like it's pretty close. But if I drag it like this, that's definitely not what's going to render. It's going to render a section of this that's at the render settings. So I want to click on this blue ball right there. So under the word Show, there's a blue circle with a box around it. I'm going to click on that. That's your render view. So this is what is going to your render region. That's what's going to render when we render. So however we line things up, if I put this building like right there on the edge, I'm pretty much guaranteed that that is what it's going to look like when it renders, that this side will be the side of my frame, okay? So I want to be aware of what that looks like. So I'm going to basically start off at the very beginning of my scene at frame 1. I'm going to hit S to set a keyframe on everything. I'm going to go up to frame 240, and I'm going to move in and just kind of turn the corner a little bit. That's all I'm doing. Okay, and then I set another key. So here's my camera move. It's moving in, and it's also just kind of like rotating slightly. That's as crazy of a camera as we want to get with this. Okay, remember, we're showing off the animation. We're not showing off how crazy camera movements we can make. Just as a, for instance, because no matter how many times I hit my head against the wall and say this, people still don't listen, so whatever. This is a bad camera, so I'm just going to rename this bad camera. So I remember it's a bad camera and I don't accidentally render it. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to go, actually I'll go way back like this. So I'll set a key here, I'll go up to 240. And then I'll set a key right there. So this is a bad camera, do not do this. So I hit play, and then it goes off of there because the camera's also rotating, so then what people do is they say, oh, I'll just rotate it back, and then they set a key. Nope, I'll just rotate it back again. I set a key. Oops, I didn't set a key. There you go. So there's a bad camera. It's moving way too quick, and it's kind of like, whoa, sporadic right there at the end. Okay? It's way too much movement for anything in our scene. We don't want any crazy cameras in our scene. We want nice, simple movements that just show off the animation. That's all we need. I'm going to delete bad camera. The bad camera. Cool. Sweet. So see how smooth that camera is? That's what we want. Nice, smooth camera. Okay? And if you look at your assignment sheet, you'll notice that one of the things, 8-second animation with smooth camera movement. Right? That's what we want. Okay. So while we're working inside Maya, we don't need to work inside that camera view, so I can jump out of it. To switch between your camera views, you can go to Panels Perspective and switch between any one of your camera views. Once you have keyframes set, it doesn't matter. I could just click on stuff and then zoom around, and then when I hit play, it'll just jump back to where my camera was. So that's acceptable also. Okay? All right, so now what we want to do is let's set up some lights in the scene. We have a basic camera. You can always reset that up later too. In Arnold, we have a couple things. Because we're going to be rendering with Arnold, we want to use all Arnold lights and all Arnold materials. Under this Arnold menu, there is stand-ins, lights, curve collector, blah, 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 so on. So I'm going to go to lights, and I'm going to add in what's called a sky dome. Okay, so under Arnold, lights, sky dome, this creates a sky dome. And a sky dome, if I click the Arnold button here and I say render, this will bring up my Arnold render, and I can see what that's going to look like. Okay, so Arnold, render, that brings this up. Now the cool thing about Arnold is that this is a live view, so that as I make changes outside in Maya, it will change my render view. Okay, so as I click and drag inside here, you can see how it's updating my render so I can see what it looks like at different frames. So that's incredibly helpful for setting stuff up. So the idea with this sky dome is that it gives us what's called ambient light, just kind of like a starting point to give our light to our scene. For most cases, you need to add other lights. For this assignment, it really is typically enough just to have that inside the scene. So you can get away with just adding this to your scene. If you want other lights in your scene, then I would hit Control-A to get the attribute editor. I would knock the intensity down on this. and then I would add other lights on top of that. Okay, so now I have like a base lighting, and then I can go through my lights in Arnold and add, let's say, an area light. An area light is very similar to the one that was used inside Cinema. It's just a square light shape. And I'm going to kind of position it and pull it back a bit and pull it up some. There we go. All right, so there's my area light in my scene. By default, the intensity of these is like crazy low. So it's at 1. So if I set this to 10, no difference. I set it to 100, a little bit of a difference. I set it to 1,000. There we go. Now we're starting to get somewhere. If I set it to 5,000, now it's like too much. 2,500. Okay, so I'm being really brutal with these values because I want to get to that value quick. Don't go 10, 11, 12. Take you forever to get to 2,500. Okay, you can also say use color temperature. And what this will do is if you, I think I showed this in this class, or maybe it's other class. These are blurring together already. There's different values for different lights. So at 5,500, we're going to get more of a daylight blue color. At 2,700, we're going to get more of like a reddish color. So by using the color temperature, you can simply just kind of drag this and get different values. So I can go from this red color to an orangey color to more of a blue color. And then the same thing for my sky dome. My sky dome is a light, so I can also say use color temperature there and have that set up as well. Okay. So typically I recommend setting up your lights first, just so you have, pull that down some, there we go. Just so you have a starting point without adding any like extra bells and whistles to your scene. Then for your materials, try to find things that go together good. Don't pick 15 random colors and just start throwing them on stuff. I'm going to switch to my other perspective view just so I don't get in there. So for, let's say, these items here, those are all the same kind of item. I'm going to marquee all of these. And then under lighting and shading, I'm going to go to assign new material. Okay, so grab an item in your scene, I don't care what it is, and then hold down the space bar, go to lighting and shading, and say assign new material. And then under the Arnold shader, we want it to be an AI standard surface. All right, so now what this gives us is it gives us an object or a material that has a basic color and some specularity to it. So we're seeing some shininess. If you look on the item that I picked, there's definitely some shininess coming in there. So what I can do is, for this one, we'll keep it simple. I can add a color to this. So if I just click on the color, pick a color, there it is, green, blue, whatever. I can play with the saturation. I can come down to my specular weight and pull that down, and that will get rid of my specularity. So any reflection that I had, it will get rid of it. Okay? If I pull my metalness up, it will control the kind of reflection that it's doing. So right now, it's acting more like a metal. If I pull the metalness down, it's acting more like a plastic, okay, or rubber. So obviously this is a metal, but you can play with the setting to get whatever you want. If I pull my roughness down, this will create a very sharp reflection. So imagine like a mirror or a chrome ball. That's what that would be with no roughness and full metal and no weight up here. Okay, or full weight up there. Okay, so this is very reflective. That's what we're seeing. If I pull, let me pull that back to 0.8, pull that off. If I pull the roughness all the way up, Now we're looking at something that would be like a brushed metal, okay? So for this first couple assignments, just play with these basic settings. So what is the color here? What is the metalness? What is the specular weight? And what is the roughness? Those 4 things are typically all you're going to need to worry about for these basic assignments, okay? If you further into it and you really want to play with things, you can go into any one of these things. Like if I want glass, I can start pulling this up to create more of a glass material, but whatever. It's good enough for now. Okay? So then for my next item, I would go to, let's say, these rings, and I would assign, again, another new material. And Maya does remember your last color, so I picked that color last time. So if I pick it again, it will show it to me, and there it is. And I could just pick that and then, let's say, darken it. And then I can take the roughness and pull that up. And then continue around the entire thing. Now somebody's going to want to do it, which is fine. I will show you how to do this. If you click on your surface and you wanted to add something fancier to it, all of these check boxes here, the checker boxes, are ways that we can map stuff. So in Cinema, there was just a bar and some dots. You would click the bar, you would click a file, and you would bring it in. Okay? So this is the same thing, except you click the checker box. So if I want to bring in a file for this, I don't want to just click on File. The object that's on there doesn't have a UV laid out to say what it's going to look like when it's flattened out. So I want to right-click and say Create it as a projection. Okay, so if I'm doing a file, I will do Create as Projection. And if I go to this arrow here, and I go to this folder, because I set my project, it brings me into source images. And I'm going to jump over to textures.com real quick. If you don't have an account on textures.com, I definitely recommend getting one. There's a lot of really cool stuff on there that you could use. So for something like this, I'll say brick. These ones are different textures. You wouldn't grab those. I would go down here and find something. We'll just say that this one here is good enough. No. We'll say this one here is good enough. Okay. So I create an account. It's free. I can download files. This is one of them. I think I have 10 more credits or 12 more credits for today. You get 15 credits a day that you can use. So I'm going to cut this out of here. And, oh, come on, Maya. I'm going to paste that texture inside my source images. And now it shows up. Okay? So by default, by just connecting that to it, you can see that the brick looks pretty decent on here. And as I hit play, you can see that the brick is going to stay right there. Okay? That's just this setup, that's how it's going to work. All right? If I wanted to make sure it looked good, I should obviously look at it from other views. From this side, it looks like crap because it's planar mapping it, so it's shooting it basically right from the front. So I'm going to hit this back button here, go to my projection and choose cylindrical, and now it should be good. So now I should be sufficient that now as it plays, everything looks like it's working out. It's a little bit stretched there, but I don't think it's going to be a huge issue. Okay. Now, if you don't want to go get a file, but you still want something on there just so you have a variety of shapes or colors or whatever, under your Arnold shader, still map your standard surface. We should probably be naming these two. Walls out. There we go. I'm going to click on the map, and instead of going to grab a file, I'm going to go under the 3D Textures tab and grab one of these. So let's say I go to a solid fractal. So this gives me just a basic color on top of here that I could then go ahead and play with the color to adjust what that's looking like. Okay, so I can just play with, let's say I like that. That's perfect. I want to add some color to this, so I go to color balance. I click on color gain, and then I can give that a color. Okay, now this is going to look hideous because I'm just throwing things on here. I need to take my roughness down. There we go. My brick, holy cow, my brick is like super shiny. Take that roughness down a bit too. There we go. Okay, now one more thing that I probably should put on the brick is obviously it should have some sort of bump so that it looks nice. If you chip commit to doing a texture, you need to go all the way with it, because doing it like that and leaving it, it just looks like half-assed done. Under this little guy here, this is all of our materials. Inside of Cinema, it had all the materials on the bottom, and what was nice, I do like that you can right-click on a material or a file and copy it and then just paste it onto another one. Maya has never added that feature. I wish they would. Here's all of my materials. So AI standard surface, I don't know what this one is. Probably the cap, so I'm going to call this tower cap. And then this one is that one, which is probably the bands. And then this one is my brick. So I'm going to click on the brick one. Make sure it's renamed, brick. And then I'm going to click this arrow. And this is going to basically take that texture or take this material and spread it out so I can see exactly how things are connected. Okay, so I click that and it's showing me, this is going to be confusing at first. Here's your brick, here's your standard surface. Here's how it's getting projected, here's the file you used, here's a place 2D texture, and here's a place 3D texture. So you don't need to know what any of these things do, except for this very first one, projection is connected to base color. So all I need to do is scroll down inside here under geometry. Yep. And I just need to middle drag projection onto bump mapping. Not in here, that doesn't work. I have to drag it right onto the word. And what that does is it automatically will connect a bump node to it, meaning that, well, when I go to my render, I may have to hit stop and then restart it. It's subtle, but it's there, okay? Let me take this bump depth up to maybe 5. I may need to go back and unroughen this a little bit so we can see it better. Nope, it's still not doing it. Let's go to the file itself. And I'm going to check on this button. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Oops. There is a thing down here that says alpha is luminance. So I'm going to hit alpha is luminance. It's a liar. Let me make sure this is connected correctly. So there's my projection, out color. So this is saying the out alpha is going to the bump value, which is true. The only thing I can think of is why it's not working is the values for this just may be a little too uniform. Let me pull it open in Photoshop and we'll take a look. It's got enough darks in there, so it definitely should be doing something. Let me desaturate this. Yeah, I mean, not much, but it's there. So I'm just cranking up the contrast on this. I mean, that's what I want that to look like. So let's go back in here and see. So that is connected, 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 bump 3D. It's working because it's definitely showing it there. So I go to 1 or 2, yeah. Let me close that render view and then reopen it. Sometimes it is just a little glitch inside of Arnold, or sometimes the angle we're viewing it, we just can't see. So let me get closer. And I can switch this to perspective view. Yeah, it definitely feels like the bump is working. It's just not as great as we would expect. I'm going to take that roughness up some. Good enough. Okay, so you'll go through and you'll add materials onto each one of your things. Sometimes even just adding solid colors can be very effective in doing that too. One thing to note as well is because these are 3D animated items, okay, I showed you how the texture is not swimming is what it's called on here. Even this one, oops, right here, as this moves, the texture stays locked to that surface. If I were to create a new object, like that, and then just for fun, I'm just going to go there and animate it, and then go here and animate it. And I'm going to assign the same material to this. So I'm going to right-click and go to brick, tower bands, walls out, there it is. Okay, so this looks like it's staying pretty close to where it should be. Okay, so I'm going to go into my render view. Let me make this a little bit more obvious. Grab that. Go to the arrow for color. Go to the place 3D texture, and let me just make this huge, 10, 10, and 10. Okay, so now if we, there we go. So now I'm watching this pattern here. I'm going to go up a frame, and that pattern is gone. And I go up another frame, the pattern is gone. So what's happening here is that whenever you use a 3D texture and you animate stuff, the 3D texture is actually imagined just like a fish tank. That item is just kind of floating in the middle of nowhere, and whatever is around it is the texture. As it moves around the area, it grabs another piece of that texture. Okay? Now this item is doing that. This item is not. This item back here is perfect. If I hit play or go frame by frame, you'll see how the textures for this one are locked in. So anytime we do anything like that where we're using 3D textures, and I anticipated you using 3D textures, we have to grab all of our geometry, and under rendering, we would choose texturing, create texture reference object. And what that does is it locks those texture coordinates right to these shapes. Okay? So for the rest of class, go through, fix your animation if it needs fixing, add some lights to your scene if you haven't added lights, add some materials to your scene if you need materials. Next class, animate your camera. Next class, I'll go through the process of rendering these out, some settings that we want to play with, and then compositing this together. Cool? Questions yet? No? Cool.